This is Channel 253.
Move to Tacoma! On this episode of Move to Tacoma.
I see new neighbors every day. My neighbors that live next to me are from Seattle. We've been neighbors for the past probably 7-8 years. But when they first moved here, I gave them a rundown. It's like, hey, man, this is the hood. Traditionally, it's the hood of Tacoma. So you're going to hear some gunshots. You can hear some sirens.
What did they say when you said this?
They're like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, but you're fine. And, there's no random attacks. Everything's pretty targeted. So just don't start no shit, won't be no shit.
Channel 253 is member supported. I'm producer Doug Mackey, and I hope you will show your support by going to channel253.com/membership and join. Thank you. We're back.
I'm Marguerite, and I want you to move to Tacoma.
Move to Tacoma, move to Tacoma, move to Tacoma.
You'll like it.
Move to Tacoma, move to Tacoma, move to Tacoma.com.
Hi, I'm Marguerite, and this is Move to Tacoma, and I'm here today with Silong Chhun from the Eastside of Tacoma. Welcome, Silong.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I've been following Move to Tacoma for a while, and it's such an honor to be here.
Oh, it's so great. I'm glad to finally have you in here to talk about the East Side. But before we get started, I would like to know when you moved to Tacoma and why. What's your story?
Yeah, I moved to Tacoma when I was 2 years old. I was actually born in Cambodia, and my family came to Washington State as refugees, and we settled here in Tacoma first in 1981. I was 2 years old, right? We settled in the Hilltop area, but I don't remember too much about the Hilltop area, but I know we spent about a year, maybe a year and a half there. My only fond memory of the Hilltop is eating some fish my mom fed me and throwing up all over the rice bag in our apartment.
Oh, the 80s.
Yeah, but we were really fortunate. I was really fortunate. A lot of my peers and colleagues, came here as refugees too, with either one or two parents. I was fortunate to have both parents and also a huge support system. My family, my cousins, my aunts and uncles came here and established themselves in Puyallup in the early 70s, in 75, 76, right before the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia. And I got here 4 years later, six years later in 81. So very fortunate, established a foundation, and then we first moved in Hilltop and then ended up in Salishan. If you don't know about Salishan in the 80s, it was pretty rough. The community there was, low-income housing. A lot of refugee and immigrants lived there. So that's how I got to Tacoma and grew up there, went to Lister Elementary, McElvey Middle School. I also attended Larchmont. When we had a little bit of more economic stability, we were able to move out of Salishan, and I actually lived on South End for a good 4 or 5 years before I moved back to the East Side. So yeah, that's my Tacoma story. I was 2 years old, wasn't born, but I was raised here, and the East Side made me who I am today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm curious. I mean, I don't know as much as I probably should about what it's like for a family to be a refugee to the U.S. and, everything that was going on. I think about places like Tacoma Community House. Was that there back then?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what was it like for your family? What was their experience like? Did they find, was it easy? Was it hard to adapt? What happened?
A lot happened. I think it was very difficult to adapt. You can imagine coming from a war-torn country, just leaving all this violence. Both my parents were fairly young, I think in the early 20s. My mom might have been 18 or 19 when they first had me. I haven't done the math, but...
Really? That's so funny. I've definitely done the math.
Yeah, but I mean... As challenging as it was, the community welcomed us with open arms. But speaking a little bit to the difficulties of assimilating to a brand new country, brand new culture, not speaking the language, it was extremely difficult. Learning how to navigate these systems, access to resources was really hard for a lot of us. But thankfully, you mentioned Tacoma Community House. Tacoma Community House been around since 1910. And have been, servicing immigrants and refugees since then. So really, really cool story about Tacoma Community House. Both my parents went through their programs to learn English. English as a second language, as they called it back then. And also, both of them also went through their citizenship program where they were able to gain their citizenship with the help of Tacoma Community House. Yeah, and then I grew up, and a few years ago, I was working at Tacoma Community House. So beautiful full circle moment with me. And then my colleague, Paul Manny, who's been there for 30 plus years, he was actually one of the folks who received us at SeaTac Airport in 81 when we first arrived to America.
Wow.
So Paul is an older Southeast Asian refugee from Laos as well. And, he knew my parents before I did, and I became his coworker. So that was cool. So one of the best things about growing up on the East Side during that time is that I felt like we were, because my parents and families and all of us Southeast Asian refugees came from the village setting. So the community in Salishan really had that village feeling. Right, I would go to school, come home. My parents would be at work. I could just go to my neighbor's house. Hey, I need some water. I need some food. And the door was always open. And I just remember in the summertime just playing with all the neighborhood kids. Our parents, our neighbors would just get together and have a community potluck. And it wasn't planned. It's just something that spurred the moment. And I think being in a brand new country, not knowing the cultures and customs and navigating the systems, we kind of had each other.
Yeah.
And I felt that sense of community growing up, and that really shaped the way how I live my life, right? You never go hungry at the same table I'm sitting at. And that's just how I see things. But one of the biggest challenges is just really economic stability, right? A lot of immigrants and refugees today still work in the farms. I want to give a huge shout out to Aldous Farms in Puyallup. They gave they gave my family and I huge opportunities working in the strawberries farm, the cucumber farms, and the dill farms.
It's called Aldous Farms?
Aldous.
Aldous.
Yeah, Alduris. It's pretty crazy that I still drive, on, I forgot what that, River Road Highway. They're still around, and it just triggers so much memories. I have a lot of good memories on the farm. It wasn't easy work. It was hard work, but that was one of the ways my parents and my family was really to get, gain some economic stability and just be able to make a life for ourselves. So huge thank you to Aldous. Shout out. If you go to his website, aldous.com, he does have a little blurb about thanking the Southeast Asian refugees during the 80s and 90s. So, yeah, man, shout out to cucumber farms and strawberry farms, which give us an opportunity to, to thrive and just, get our bills paid and put food on the table. And,
right.
My dad worked on a farm for at least a decade before he was able to start his own business.
So this is great. It leads to my next question, which is the East Side in general. What do you love about your neighborhood?
I think what I love about my neighborhood that it's just really different. There's a grit about it. When we call Tacoma a grit city, I feel that's what it's describing. There's a lot of blue collar workers, there's working families, and just people are just trying to put food on the tables and trying to make it to the next bill okay. And what I love about it is how the community can come together. Growing up there in the 80s and 90s, the gang violence was at its height back then. A lot of my friends and peers and colleagues were, involved in that thing too. But, when you grow up in that environment every day, it becomes normalized. You don't think it's as, dangerous as other folks from the outside think. So I think what I love about the East Side most is that when you're from the East Side, you grow up there and you raise a family there. There's this nuance that you don't really understand unless you live there, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, growing up on the East Side, especially me, I've never went outside of the East Side too much. I never went downtown.
Oh, it's so interesting.
I never went to the North End. The only time I was at the North End was a school field trip to Point Defiance Zoo, when I was in middle school. But the East Side was our world, and we didn't know Tacoma was bigger. And then, during the height of the gang violence, if you grew up on the East Side, you're mostly Asians, and that's where mostly the Bloods are. And in Hilltop, this is where the Hilltop Crips were, right? And during that time, I've never, ever set foot in Hilltop because the way it went down, it was on site. If you were in the wrong neighborhood, you looked like you didn't belong. You was automatically a target no matter who you were, And it was just crazy to me because I moved away, right? I moved away for about 10 years, lived in Portland, met my wife. I moved back, and then Hilltop is being kind of gentrified and redeveloped. And I remember meeting my friends at Hilltop Kitchen on Hilltop for the first time in 15 years. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy to me.
Were you looking around or?
Well, I felt safe. Hilltop Kitchen's a little bit more affluent,
It's true. It's not there anymore, but
not there anymore.
Kind of like a hipster restaurant, right?
Yeah. And coming from Portland, I was used to being around hipsters, so there was no fear at all.
So what do you like about living on the East Side now? I think like you've just kind of spoken to like maybe some of the like older stereotypes about the East Side, but like for you living there day to day, like what are your favorite things?
I really love the diversity. You can walk down the block. I live right by the 9th Day on 56th and McKinley. I feel so comfortable in this neighborhood. I can just walk around. I just love the diversity. You can hear 2 or 3 different languages spoken at the grocery stores.
Right.
We can go to B&A Market or any of the Mexican restaurants. We have a Colombian restaurant. I think all of the best Mexican and Hispanic and Latino restaurants are on the East Side, but don't tell nobody.
I don't think that's a controversial take, but I mean, maybe somebody thinks it is, but I don't think so. I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah, it's so vibrant. It's colorful. I think it's interesting, and the folks there are a little bit crazier than I think than the rest of Tacoma, which I love.
Let's talk about all the things that real estate agents cannot talk about. This is the neighborhood where the crazy people live. Like, okay.
Yeah, we have loose dogs in the neighborhoods. I mean, there's been loose dogs in the neighborhood since I was a kid, and we knew whose dog it was. But that's the dog is family too.
We've got kids wandering house to house. We've got dogs wandering house to house.
That's exactly how it was.
And the best Mexican food in town.
The best Mexican food in town, man. Best food trucks. We have a Colombian restaurant out there on McKinley. That's delicious. Just got to come out. And every weekend when it gets warmer on 72nd in Portland, well, not 72nd. What street is it? I don't know. Anyways, by the Wendy's and all that stuff, there's an outdoors swap meet where there's tacos, there's street tacos. It's just... things happen and the city has no idea that it's happening.
Yeah.
The community come together, and that's one thing about brown colored folks, refugees and immigrants, that we're able to thrive, without the assistance or resources that weren't provided for us anyway, because that's what we're used to doing. So every weekend there's like a swap meet out on 72nd Street in I think it's 72nd. Next to Portland, where the Safeway, the old Kmart is, right? And it's just so lively, and it's just so busy, and it's packed, and everybody comes out, and that's what I love. It's just the diversity, the different languages spoken, and just the amount of different restaurants and markets that you can visit. You have a Mexican grocery store, you have a Cambodian grocery store, you have a Vietnamese grocery store,
right?
And all the donut shops are owned by Cambodians as well in the East Side. And I think to me, it just feels like community. Like I could, although every day you hear a siren go off, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? There's always fire trucks going, there's always police sirens going. And believe it or not, there's still till this day, there's at least a gunshot that we hear, either gunshots or fireworks that go off weekly. And my kids who's grown up here, this is really bad, but they're like, every time they hear the gunshot or fireworks, and we've just learned to like stay away from the windows.
Well, I mean, this is something that I think is so tricky for me to talk about, because there's actually being a licensed realtor, I'm not allowed to comment on, because of our rather troublesome history of segregating cities as a profession. Sure. I'm not allowed to comment on the safety of a community, and I'm not allowed to certainly comment on what kinds of people live anywhere, right? So this is a conversation that I'm mindful that I am not used to navigating, and not because I don't care or I don't want to be honest, but because I don't want to. I mean, are we even enforcing the law anymore? I don't know. But technically there's a law about this. So I think your perspective is really valuable. And what is happening in my head is I'm imagining people from other parts of town with their preconceived notions about what it's like that talk about the East Side that don't go there. Like you're saying, there's all these things that happen there that people don't even know about, that aren't talked about. But then also the wrong things that people believe about the East Side because of that same phenomenon. And so how do you sort of balance how you explain your neighborhood to outsiders, where you're like, I want to tell the truth. I want to be honest. We're not going to sugarcoat this. We're not, we're not going to throw an HGTV glossy coat over my community. And also this is a real place where wonderful people live and have great lives. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do balance it. I always tell people, I got to be honest, the East Side of Tacoma is hood. That's where it's always been the hood. That's, the AKA ghetto or hood, whatnot. But
okay, but wait. Okay, I have to say, because this is not what everybody says to me. And I did tell you right before we started, I haven't actually lived on the East Side ever. I've lived on East D and 43rd. That's as close as I got in 2002. Mm-hmm. So I have no lived experience, right, crossing the street. But I'm trying to think of like the right way to ask this. Like, do you think everybody's having would everybody in your neighborhood call it the hood? I feel like nobody has ever said like when I'm talking to people that live there, like, this is the hood. I hear gunshots every day. I feel like you are the first person to say that to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is the hood. It absolutely is the hood.
No confusion.
I mean, it's improved, right? It's I mean, just Tacoma in general has improved overall. So.
Well, and again, we're not trying to people want to move to Tacoma. I'm not worried about convincing anybody to move anywhere. I'm more interested in like giving a clear picture for people in and out of town of like what it's really like. Yeah,
well, it depends who you talk to and when they moved here, right? If for a person like me who's lived on the east side since '81 when I moved here as a child, growing up in Salishan, which was a community, Salishan was low income housing. There's Section 8 housing. There's no sugarcoating that. That's what it was, and that's where we were placed as refugees. And when you live in low-income housing, what demographics usually live there? Poor folks, right? Poor folks, usually black folks.
By design.
Yeah, by design. And, the redlining, all that stuff, comes into play if historically. So me growing up there, Eastside Tacoma is definitely the hood. We grew up poor. I mean, nobody lived in that community were rich. If you think about Salishan and the community and the housing there, the housing there was built during World War II to house soldiers, right? The family soldiers. And during that time, all the good materials for any building went straight to the war. So if you think about these homes that were built temporarily to house the soldiers and their families during the war, and it was supposed to be torn down and rebuilt, we lived in that Section 8 housing, and it was just torn down. And recently, in 2007? And rebuilt, something like that?
Right.
So, there's no sugarcoating. It's definitely the hood. We grew up poor. There's a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, a lot of gang activity, and a lot of policing in our neighborhood, too.
Right.
One of the things I do want to mention, and growing up on the east side, as dangerous as one would think it was, no matter what crimes happen, if we get jumped, if our car got broken into, we never call the cops.
Right.
Right. And for many reasons, right? We don't feel safe around police. Police usually come and harass our neighbors, harass my parents because they didn't speak English. So there was a barrier there. And, at the time when we first came here as refugees, I don't think the humanization was there. People just saw it as foreign.
Other.
So it's kind of dehumanizing in that point, too. And second, the cops to us never solved or reduced any crime. They just come and give you shit.
Right.
Write down the crime and nothing ever happens.
A super controversial statement to say anymore that like the history of the Tacoma police is not necessarily one that anybody's going to try to like make a lot of excuses for.
No,
right? Like,
I
think mistrust of the police on the east side is probably pretty warranted.
Yeah, deep rooted since the 70s, right? This is nothing new, and you can see how the culture and the history of that is still resonating today, and that's one of the things I like to mention, that everything is interconnected. Nothing just happens overnight.
Yeah.
But going back to the safety of the east side, like I said, we grew up. I grew up around friends who were gang members, and it just normalized all the violence. But then through the struggle and the challenges, you still find the joy. You still find the community. There's because I believe that everybody who grew up on the east side during my time were intentionally good people, just in an environment where there was less resources, less mentorship, just no guidance and directions. We kind of had to fend for ourselves. So, the violence and the gang stuff was really a failure of the refugee programs that brought us here. They didn't provide what we needed to thrive and survive. So, that's just the reality of it.
Absolutely. So when you go to the east side, you can see, it looks like Tacoma, but it looks like Tacoma, frankly, with fewer resources.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you can see the underinvestment in roads, sidewalks, lights, infrastructure, right? You just see it on every level. And I am not, I've never worked in like local government really or anything like that. So like understanding like, how does that continue to happen? Like when you look at it as somebody who's grown up there, who's been involved, you've had jobs in the government, so you understand how things work probably a lot better than I do.
A little bit.
How is it that kind of continuous reinvestment persists?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. But what I want to
continuous lack of reinvestment.
lack of reinvestment. I think I think, when we say marginalized, I want to be clear that marginalized means ignored.
Excluded, yeah.
Ignored. Like, this is a community that historically in Tacoma has been ignored.
Yeah.
Right? Over-policing, under-resourced, and just not paid attention to. And I think the reason for that is just, it's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, I don't know what our city leaders' head were and what they were like in the 80s. City government was like so far away from my thought process as a kid, as a refugee, trying to learn this country. So I didn't even know anything like government exists. But to answer your question, why do I think that side of town was marginalized? Because this is where the poor folks live.
Right.
When you live in a city and you place all poor folks and low-income folks into one area, they often tend to get ignored because they're seen as a burden and not people, right?
Right.
Instead of being part of the solution, they become the problem. So I think for me, from my experience, maybe the city government at that time didn't see us as a community that can help benefit them in any way. So, the being marginalized and ignored, it's easier to not think about it. It's easier to not advocate for the most vulnerable. It's easier to not give a shit, to be honest. When you're in power and you don't see a benefit in investing in these communities, then why should you?
Well, and I'm the thought that's kind of popping into my head is, okay, well, there have been things, though. There have been investments. There have been
absolutely.
Individuals I can think of. There have been community groups on the East Side that have advocated and politicians from the East Side that have advocated successfully and unsuccessfully to get infrastructure developments. But why is it that with the entire Tacoma Renaissance that we've been going through since, I think we're about the same age. So in my mind, I feel like things kind of started really kicking off in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Like, why is it that the East Side doesn't seem to get their fair share? Is that even like an incendiary question? Do you think that's an accurate question?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you honestly if the East Side got their fair share or not. I haven't been involved in the decision-making process a long time. But as far as how we feel in that community,
as the person who's experienced the impact,
you can see that back then we didn't have as many parks. There was no skate parks where I grew up, so we had to make our own. I skated growing up. But now you see, I think Tacoma in the 80s and 90s, the resources were also limited, right?
Right.
So you only had, it's like a piece of the pie. You only had enough piece of the pie to go in certain communities, and only certain communities who have the privilege of being engaged and involved civically or not can advocate for those things. So if you want to put it into perspective, the folks on the East Side are blue-collar workers, right? Blue-collar workers, working families, maybe working 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day. When they get home, working minimum wage or a little bit over minimum wage, working 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. You come home, you're tired, you got kids to feed. You don't have time to be
advocating for sidewalks.
Or advocating to fix these potholes, or advocating for safe parks, or advocating for even a community center. I mean, for a while, the East Side didn't have a community center, right? You used to have a Boys and Girls Club, the East Side Neighborhood Center in Salishan that got torn down. And just recently, these investments are coming in because the whole city, I believe, is thriving. And, they say a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's what's happening. So when the tide raises, there's enough resources to go around. And I still feel like the East Side get the crumbs of the cookie.
They're getting stuff.
We
could talk about the East Side Community Center. We could talk about IDEA. But still, there's a long way to go.
There's still a long way to go. And as you can see, as folks are, gaining a little bit more being more economically stable, they're absolutely having more capacity and energy to advocate for these things. So to answer your questions, largely historically, the working families on the East Side didn't have the privilege to be civically engaged or to be able to advocate for access and resources. For one, maybe they didn't even know these things exist or there's any opportunities to speak to government. Because if you live in the hood, you feel like government is oppressive and never works for you, right? There's no one coming to your community saying, oh, government can only work if you make it work for you.
Right.
And then being dominated by, immigrants and refugees, they're not citizens, so they can't even vote anyway. So what benefit does it give any city leaders or politicians to come and talk to these communities that can't even vote for you?
Right. There's a lot stacked against
Yeah. But I mean, overall, I think it's one of the most beautiful, parts of the town. We have Swan Creek, which is now being developed as a green space. We have the only mountain bike trails, I think, in Tacoma, and it's a huge one. It's nationally popular. People come all the time, and then just Swan Creek in general is just a beautiful green space. Where can you go in the city of Tacoma when you can see salmon run, right? And then ride your mountain bike, and now walk your dog, and now it's all connected. But
Doug is giving me the look, and we have to go to a break. But when we come back, I want to know, I need to know everything about Swan Creek. I don't know anything about Swan Creek. Okay. I want you to explain it to me.
Okay.
This is Channel 253 co-founder Eric Hanberg thinking back to 2017 and the start of the first Trump administration, Adult Civics Happy Hour, Citizen Tacoma. All of these things came in many ways to a response to what was happening at the national level. We wanted to focus local, and we are still here for another Trump administration.
It's happening again.
It is happening again, but we're still here. We appreciate that you are still here, listening, engaging with the issues that you care about in your local community.
We renew our interest in our goal and our mission, and we hope that you will renew your membership as we move forward. And if you're not a member yet, please go to channel253.com/membership and join for $4 a month or $40 a year.
We truly appreciate the support of all of you who have given, and we hope to welcome more of you in the new year that can help keep independent media alive that is focused on Tacoma and our community. Thank you.
Move to Tacoma!
And we're back with Silong Chhun from the east side of Tacoma. Welcome back, Silong.
Thank you.
All right, so you were telling us about Swan Creek Park, and it's clear I don't know very much about Swan Creek Park. So tell me everything I need to know. Tell the people what they need to know.
Yeah, well, aside from Point Defiance Park, Swan Creek Park is probably one of the best green spaces in Tacoma.
It's huge.
It's huge in general. It's on the east side. But before it was Swan Creek Park, it was just, we call it the back roads.
Like the back rooms?
Yeah, the back roads. The back roads of Salishan, because growing up there, you imagine, I mentioned earlier, Salishan, the housing development used to be housing for, soldiers and their families during the World War II. And, if you go back there now, you see roads. There's a dog park. There's a mountain bike park trail and all that. It's so nice and green, and it's just a good place for kids to run around. But before all of the development there, we that grew up on the east side used to call it the back roads. And my first memory of Swan Creek Park was being at Lister Elementary School. We were in 3rd grade, and if you're from the east side, you went to Lister Elementary, McElvey, and Lincoln High School. We have an urban legend of a character named Bald-Headed Murphy. He used to be our boogeyman. He's kind of like Jason, Bald-Headed Murphy was just an urban legend that really resonated within that community, especially us being kids, where during recess at Lister Elementary School, we'd sneak out and go across a fence. And Swan Creek, before it was developed into the park that it is today, you have to imagine all the roads there. There used to be housing back there, too, just abandoned housing. Some houses were still intact. Some houses, just the structure intact. But before and after school and during school, we'd go back there and play hide and seek. We'd have this game we used to call Ditch. This
is so scary.
Thinking about it, I would hate for my kids to be playing in the woods with some abandoned homes.
Oh my God. I remember playing in the woods in the 80s and having terrifying stories, but this sounds really spooky.
But, it wasn't spooky at the time, but now that I think about it, I would not have my kids be back there. But, being kids, curious.
Yeah.
We didn't have internet or anything. So it was just fun,
true.
right?
Yeah.
So we used to play this game called Ditch, was like hide and seek, but with teams. So you have 2 or 3 folks on each team, and there'd be a home base. So one team would go hide, one team would count, and how the game works, if you catch your opposing team, and then you just switch roles, right? But the best part of the game is if you were able to hide, say you got caught and you go to home base, and then your team come tag you out, you get to go hide again. So we used to run around Swan Creek all the time, and urban legend has it that there's this scary man that we call Bald-Headed Murphy. And I used to have friends that would say, oh, I saw Bald-Headed Murphy. I had a friend named Larry Glover who said he fought Bald-Headed Murphy. And to us, I've never seen Bald-Headed Murphy, but we used to scare ourselves. We'd go to the woods, look for his house, and there was like this house down in the hill. It's just probably one of those houses that haven't been torn down yet. So, and we just scare ourselves, and come to find out with a little bit of research, because I want kind of do a documentary on this bald-headed urban legend. But there was a real family with the Murphys that existed, and I just learned this like recently. But yeah, so Swan Creek.
No spoilers for the documentary.
Right.
Okay, so today you're saying like you go mountain hiking there. There's dog trails.
Yeah.
Like there's hiking trails.
There's hiking trails.
Like it's like one of the better parks in Tacoma, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things I say to people is like with parks, Tacoma, like it's a pretty well-funded organization.
Absolutely.
And so no matter what neighborhood you end up in the city, you're probably going to have really good green spaces.
Yeah.
Am I lying?
You're not lying.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Shout out to Parks Tacoma, man. One of the best park systems, if not in the United States, but in Washington for sure.
Yeah, we're so lucky.
So lucky to have good leadership there, just being stewards of the environment. But Swan Creek today, such a beautiful green space. There's a community garden for the folks that live in Salishan, and it's just a mixed use. You know, you sign up, get your plot, and you won't see this community anywhere else, where you have folks speaking Ukrainian, speaking Vietnamese, speaking Lao, speaking Samoan, all coming together, you know, just being community, right? And you have that space, and then you have picnic shelters, and then now you go a little bit deeper into the roads, you'll run into a mountain bike trail. Like where in any city that you can find a mountain bike trail in just the middle of the city.
Right in the middle of your neighborhood.
Yeah, and not just the east side, too, the south end. You know, the south end with Wapato Park, we have this beautiful man-made lake with nice trails, nice picnics. This is just less than a 10-minute drive from wherever you are on the east side. And the one thing I do love about Tacoma as a whole, it's a fairly small city, but also big, but everything else.
I'm always trying to explain this to people because they get their impression of Tacoma driving on I-5, right?
Yeah.
So they have their whole take is coming from the freeway.
Yeah.
And if you're coming from a place like Seattle or Bellevue where you're used to ton of traffic, I'm like, you don't understand, like you can live on the east side and shop at Metropolitan Market if you want to. It's a 10-minute drive, right? Like getting from one end of town to the other is, I think at max, maybe 20 minutes.
Maybe 20 minutes, but
right? Like
some
it's
traffic.
very well connected.
Yeah.
So why is it then that you have such a different experience? This is something people ask me all the time, and I don't have an answer. So maybe you have an answer.
Well,
you could be 1 mile away and have a completely different experience of the city.
Well, I think we all have different experiences because we stay in our comfort zone. I have friends who grew up on the east side that doesn't even go downtown, like until recently, right?
Right.
Because there's bars down there. But you know, we kind of stay to ourselves. I mean, historically, east side and Hilltop, you know, enemy territory, right? I never went to Hilltop since I moved out of Hilltop. You just don't go there. But I think the answer to the question that people have such different experience and kind of siloed because you stay where you're comfortable. This is your neighborhood. I mean, some folks don't feel safe on the east side. I take walks. I ride my bike all the time. It's just how we grew up and what we're used to. But I think, you know, folks are just used to staying in their comfort zone. Like I have friends that don't go to the north end there's no reason to go there, right? So, and
I can see how that can happen.
Yeah, and with the same thing, there's so many people that live in Tacoma that doesn't come to the east side.
So if you're talking to somebody right now and they're from Tacoma, they've grown up in Tacoma, they lived in Tacoma their whole life, like what would be like your afternoon tour of the east side? Like what would you recommend as it's time to dabble in the east side? Where do you go hang out?
Yeah, we'll go back to Swan Creek.
Start there.
Start there. There's hiking trails. You know, in the wintertime, you see salmon run, which is super cool. If you're a mountain bike fan, you can go there. But, you know, just to enjoy the green spaces and you know, that Parks Tacoma provide. But that'll be one place. The second place, I just take them to 72nd Street, where all the businesses are. Small businesses. We have so many, you know, good thrift stores. And, you know, just the food there. And I'll bring him during the weekend where there's a whole, like, community that comes out and do their swap meet and their food. It's just like a food festival every single weekend. That's what definitely would take him. And then I would also take him to the 56th Street Park, you know, now with the swimming pool, also another Parks Tacoma park. There's just so many exciting things to see and do.
That's awesome. Do you have like a favorite spot where you take people when they're like coming from out of town? Yeah, it's like
Creek.
My house. We never go anywhere.
Right. Right. So, I think Swan Creek would be probably one of the biggest spots. And then, Wapato Park, too. Wapato Lake Park, if they like that, But as far as restaurants go, I don't even know how to say the Colombian restaurant. It's pretty new. That's my favorite. I go there quite often. I don't know. It's a good question. But it's always Swan Creek. That's always the gathering spot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So when you think about, we're in a situation right now where a lot is changing. We're having conversations about getting funding and, refugees. And it's like, I'm thinking about the moment that we're in and how much, how many people are experiencing, the same story your family experienced when you were a baby. They're new here, probably working with Tacoma Community House, trying to find community, trying to find their place, landing in whatever neighborhood they've landed in Tacoma. Like, how have things changed, do you think, for the refugee community here in Tacoma?
Yeah, I think a lot has changed for the better.
Okay, that's good news.
Yeah.
Even in these times, even in these unprecedented times.
Even in these unprecedented times, because good. I think, being the first wave of Southeast Asian refugees, being the first anything is not easy, especially, with the United States accepting Southeast Asian refugees. I think it's the largest influx of refugee migration in the history of the United States, modern history of the United States anyway. And I think the United States as a whole, not just Tacoma, wasn't really prepared to tackle that. They didn't have the resources, they didn't know the nuances, and they didn't know what the refugees didn't know. So it's hard to provide services when there's a disconnect there. You don't know what the needs are.
Right.
So given it's been 50 years since the first came to the United States, I think given the experience of 50 years, I think for immigrants and refugees, we as a community are more welcoming, more accepting. Tacoma is a welcoming city. I think folks in this community, the Eastside and South End specifically, are more open and used to, helping folks navigate when they needed to. I think that's one of the unique things about growing up on the Eastside. We're always willing to help. We're always willing to step up. So being able to provide more resources and help folks get in the right direction, I think that's what is the best thing that's happened for our immigrant and refugee communities. Let me tell you a story about what I mean when I say this community on the East Side. So I live right by Sheridan Elementary School, and my kids went to school with a lot of kids in the neighborhood. This one morning, this grandma. She's Jose's grandma. I have no idea what her name is, but I know Jose because he's a classmate of my son's.
Yeah.
There's this one morning where I was on my way to work, and Jose's grandma sees me as I walk into my car. She waves me down. I say hi. How are you doing? And she hands me documents. Right? She goes, "Can you bring this to Jose? She doesn't speak English too well. Can you bring this to Jose's school? I know he went to Stewart.
Yeah.
My son goes there." So I'm like, "Oh, sure." So just random. She gives me a whole bunch of documents to bring to him. I go to Stewart, and I just turn it in for him, and everything's all good. I followed up a few days because she lived down the street. I just go knock on her door and say, "Is everything okay?" And then Jose was at home. He said, "Yeah, everything's fine." So this is the community I'm talking about. Like the people just trust each other. Even we're just engaging in passing. I've really never had a conversation with her, but she was able to say, "Hey, can you bring this to my grandkid's school for me?" And she trusts me to do it. And that's just the community that that really emphasized what the East Side stands for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about this moment and even just everybody talking about community. Oh, the answer to all of our stress right now is community. What we need is more community. You need to know your neighbors. Yeah. And so many people may live in what would be considered an expensive neighborhood, a desirable neighborhood where everybody's very successful and has a lot of money. And they probably don't know their neighbors.
Yeah,
they
don't.
Probably couldn't walk up to a person around the corner and give them a bunch of papers to take to their kid's school, right? That comfort level isn't there.
Yeah.
So, what is the advice you have for folks as far as maybe haven't grown up in that, maybe don't even know how to do that?
Yeah.
What do you think people need to know?
Well, I think you just got to talk to your neighbors. When you see them grab their mail at the end of the block, just don't be afraid to say hi. You know, Tacoma's grown. We have a brand new neighborhood down the street where I live from, and I see new neighbors every day. My neighbors that live next to me are from Seattle. We've been neighbors for the past probably 7-8 years, but when they first moved here, you know, I gave them a rundown. It's like, hey, man, this is the hood. Traditionally, it's the hood of Tacoma, so you're going to hear some gunshots. You can hear some sirens.
What did they say when you said this?
They're like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, but you're fine. And, you know, there's no random attacks. Everything's pretty targeted, so just don't start no shit, won't be no shit. You know what I mean?
I feel like this is exactly what Seattleites think is going to happen if they move to Tacoma. They're going to have that exact conversation. You gave them the full experience.
Yeah, but you know, my neighbors are cool. We're hella cool. Shout out to Stephen and Mel. They're just cool, man. They have chickens that lay eggs, and with the eggs prices, they share their eggs with us.
That's
you know,
amazing.
the little basket that they just put it in, and it's just those things. And every single person who's new to the neighborhood the block that I live on, I make sure I reach out to them.
And what happens when you talk to your neighbors? Like, are most people like excited? Like, I feel like I've tried to meet my neighbors, and most people are like, "Oh, okay," and you know, maybe exchange some phone numbers, and other people are just like, I don't know, maybe their parents taught them like, you don't want to have to talk to these people. You don't want to live next to a person you don't like, or I don't know what the reason is that some people are just like, leave me alone.
Yeah, well, my experience is everyone's really receptive and just happy that you're talking to them, you know? You treat each other as human beings, right? Just saying hi. There's many a times where I just walk around and people yelling my name. You're like, Silong, hey. I have no idea who it is. You know, they're just driving by. So I think my advice to folks who want to, you know, when you talk about community, be about community, being in community, community starts at home. Community starts in your neighborhood. So talk to your neighbors. Bring them gifts. If you bake extra cookies and bring to them. You never know that gesture can just start a whole relationship. So every single person on my block knows who I am, and we know each other, and we take care of each other, you know. Even, you know, my neighbor across the street from Mike, he'll be gone for a few days. He has a younger child. He said, hey, I'm going to be gone a few days for work. Can you just keep an eye out, you know, on the house and, you know, his family? Things like that. And
amazing.
Yeah. And
feed the cat.
Feed the cat. Yeah, that's what my kids do too. When my neighbors are out, Steve and Mel's out, my kids are the one that goes, let the dogs out. And
so good.
Yeah, so when you say community, that's what community is, and that's what the Eastside stands for. Everyone has each other's back, and I feel that to the core.
So good. I think about, like, you know, it's been 10 years almost since I started this website. And I was talking with the guest before you about it because he's newish and didn't know what it was. And I was saying, like, oh, yeah, like when I started the website, like nobody was really trying to move to Tacoma. Like nobody was really like gassing it up on the internet. And I thought, oh, this is a good idea. And then come to find out, you know what? A lot of people don't really like it when you do that. And so I understand that we're in this tension of like, we want our neighborhoods to improve. We want our city to improve. We want to have a great place to live. And also the more people that want to be here, when you have limited resources, the more tension there is around, well, okay, who gets the resources? Who gets to live here? That whole conversation. And so I just say that before I ask the question, like, what is your vision for the East Side? Like, what do you consider like success for your community, for your kids going forward 10, 20, 30 years? Like, how do you want to see it grow and change, and how do you not want to see it grow and change? Yeah,
that's a great question. I envision the East Side as to be what I'm to be what I'm used to growing up, is to be community oriented, being knowledgeable of who your neighbors are. I think just getting to know your neighbors. But my overall vision of the East Side is to be a place that's safe, economically viable. I want to bring more businesses there, more jobs there, so people can work and play where they live. Because a lot of folks that live on the East Side, you know, there's really not a lot of jobs there. I mean, there's a huge cabinet maker, there's a steel plant. But even those folks, I don't think live in the area, right? So my overall vision for the East Side is just to have a community that feels like a community, feel like a village where you can leave your door unlocked, right? But that's not the case in a lot of cities. Right? I would say
there are very few places I would ever do that.
But even though I just want a place where folks have parks to go to, which we have now, improve on that, just to be able to walk outside and feel safe. And a lot of folks, I see a lot of folks walking their dogs, and it's becoming that way, but at the same time, not displacing folks that
Right.
have traditionally lived there.
So how do we do that? And I what I love is you've been so honest in this conversation. You're like, it's the hood. I hear gunshots every day, and it's like, okay,
I still do.
Like, real talk about your neighborhood. And at the same time, you're like, but we need more businesses. We need more investment. So how do you balance and I mean, believe me, this is my life. Like trying to have real, honest conversations about where I live with strangers all the time about Tacoma. Like how do you balance like reality and inspiring people? Like,
that's a great question. I don't think I have a good answer to that, but I think...
Okay, good, because I don't have one either.
But I think the best thing we can do is, if you look at the history of the East Side and the South End itself, a lot of, even today, if you go look at the businesses now, the barbershops, the restaurants, the grocery stores, they're all mom and pops. The biggest grocery store we have on our side of town is a Safeway. We have 2 Safeways. Right, and then
I'm trying to think like where are the Safeways on the east side?
Well, we have one on 56th and then one on 72nd towards the Midland.
I was thinking like towards downtown there wasn't anything between. There's no grocery stores on the east side between 56th and like I-5.
There is. There's smaller ones. There's, I mean, there's the B&A, which is International Food Mart, right? And then next to the old Kmart there on 72nd Street, I think, is Cappy's Produce.
Yeah.
And Cappy's
Produce.
But
that's also still further out, right?
Yeah, a little further out.
But you have to go across Pacific Avenue to get like, there's, in the Lincoln District, there's more.
Yeah, Lincoln District, there's more. But a lot of folks think it's a grocery food desert. It's really not. We have Cappy's Produce, we have fresh produce. Then we have all of our Asian restaurants, Asian supermarkets like B&A.
Right.
I mean, that's where I get my oysters, right? That's where my wife goes shopping for all of the Asian stuff we need, and we need any Hispanic or Mexican ingredients. It's just down the street, right next to the O'Reilly's. So when you don't come to this neighborhood and don't know where all these shops are, people think it's a desert. We don't need a Trader Joe's out our way.
Right.
We don't need it. We have everything we already need. You just got to know where to find it.
So how do you know where to find it? Oh, I mean, obviously you've lived there your whole life, but like for your neighbors, when your neighbors were like, hey, where do you go? Where are we going to get our stuff? Like, is there like a list?
Yeah. Well,
is there a spot that you go to see it all, or do you just have to talk to your neighbors?
I just got to talk to them, Well, if they have any questions, suggestions, I'll suggest them,
Yeah.
But I think we have everything we need there. I think that's one of the hidden gems, right? It's just, where else can you go find Japanese Kit Kats, in Tacoma, besides going to H Mart? You can go to B&A and find all that stuff there.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you talk about like, this is my freaking realtor brain that I have to like recalibrate, because when you say like, we're looking for investment, we want more businesses, I go straight to, more Trader Joe's, sure, like restaurants. But you're saying like, no, like employers.
Right.
I mean, what do you mean when you say we want more investment and we want more opportunity?
Well, we want small business to thrive. I think small business is the backbone of the area in general. Because if you look at every shop, every barbershop, every restaurant, every grocery store, it's mom and pop owned. There's no big... And these businesses, establishments can become employers as well. As far as attracting like big businesses and to become a major form of employment, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Yeah. That's something way out of my that I've ever thought about. But that's a good question, Does.
Well, I have really loved this conversation. It's been like so far ranging. Is there anything you want to make sure that you say before we wrap it up that like you really want to communicate to people, either to your neighbors that live on the east side that would be watching, or to people that have never been there?
Yeah, I just want to invite those who've never visited the East Side before just to come by, check out Swan Creek, check out our Wapato, which is not technically on the East Side, but it's close enough. One of the places, I grew up coming, but just come visit, come check out the food. We have all the cool thrift stores if you love thrifting. We have the best Mexican food in town. And on the weekends, just check out 72nd Street where the old Kmart used to be. It's live, vibrant. There's music. There's fresh, food on the grill. It's just the best time.
And if people want to keep up with you and follow you online, like where are you on the internet? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, I have an Instagram, LinkedIn. My social media handle is @thefake_Silong. That's really it.
We'll add to the show notes. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I love what Move to Tacoma is doing. I love how you're highlighting our city and just encouraging and proving to people that Tacoma is a really cool city. I also want to mention about the whole Tacoma in general as a filmmaker myself.
Yes.
If you're a filmmaker and you love the film and documentary or narrative, whatever, but Tacoma has so many different landscapes. We have hills that make it look like San Francisco. We have brick buildings that make it look like Philadelphia. You can film in Swan Creek and make it look like you're in the woods, or you can go to Dune Park and just make it look like anywhere. We have so many beautiful landscapes and buildings and historical stuff to film.
It's a good looking place.
It is a good looking place. You just got to find it. You just got to find the beauty in it. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you like this podcast, check out movetotacoma.com. MoveToTacoma.com is a neighborhood guide, blog, and podcast to help people in Tacoma, Pierce County, and beyond find their place in the city of destiny. More information at MoveToTacoma.com. Move to Tacoma is part of the Channel 253 podcast network. Check out these other shows: Grit and Grain, Nerd Farmer, Interchangeable White Ladies, What Say You, Citizen Tacoma, and Kitchen 253.
This is Channel 253.